Metaverse Insider's interview series. My name is Josh, and in today's episode, we interviewed Greg Demchak, a senior director at Bentley Systems, responsible for the Digital Innovation Lab. In this interview, we address some of Bentley Systems' most exciting metaverse projects and what they have in store for us on the horizon. Thank you for your time, Greg. So to start off, could you please introduce yourself and provide us with a brief summary of what it is that you do at Bentley Systems?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Josh. So my name is Greg Demchak. I live here in London in the United Kingdom, and I run what's called the iLab, which is our digital innovation lab. And in the iLab, we're basically exploring like next gen emerging technology as it relates to use cases for architecture, engineering, construction of the built environment. And that can include anything that basically is, physically built that supports like life on Earth. So infrastructure, airports, bridges, nuclear fusion reactors in some cases. And really, in terms of like that emerging technology landscape, the last year, and I think it's what it's relevant for our call is been really looking at like what does the metaverse mean for this industry, like for practical purposes, industrial use cases.
Very interesting stuff, effectively at the forefront of the industrial metaverse.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. What we call the metaverse today. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I guess we could argue that the industrial metaverse is the most established out of all areas of the metaverse. So it's definitely a good area to be in. So, could you describe to us what some of the specific features or capabilities that you think the metaverse has to offer that can help facilitate seamless communication and information sharing between architects, engineers, contractors, and other project participants?
Yeah, sure. So when I think about the metaverse, there's obviously a lot of definitions out there and discussion points. And even if I dial back and think like, why are we even like using the term the metaverse? Well, like whether we like it or not, it's basically correlates with, Facebook changing its name to Meta and referencing Neil Stephenson's novel. So in Neil Stephenson's view of the metaverse, it's kind of an escapism, go off into a virtual world. It's Ready Player One style science fiction, which I think lands well with maybe a Facebook community where you just want to go network with people and sort of be in a fantastic world and share experiences with kind of imagined environments. But then I think what's interesting when you kind of step away from just sort of the hype around the metaverse from that perspective and look at some underlying technology that would allow the metaverse to even exist, and you sort of cross-reference that with our industry, you get some interesting overlaps. So if I come back to like what would the metaverse have as a minimum set of requirements, and going beyond just like a social network. Definitely networked is key. It needs to be a networked experience of three-dimensional content. So definitely 3D content, networked, which enables multiplayer experiences, and can be experienced through a range of devices and hardware. So not just full immersion VR. My personal belief is the metaverse can be a networked three-dimensional world can be experienced through a VR headset, through an AR experience, through a desktop computer, and all of those things combined. And I think the unique thing with our industry, right, the industrial metaverse, and specifically our customers who are building the physical world, they're already quite invested in building 3D models. Okay, so the content, the construction, the creation of the 3D assets is really just a function of being an architect, an engineer, a builder these days. So these models are already being generated with production grade CAD software. And what we've been enabling is say, how do you go from that kind of like detailed engineering grade 3D models, right into a game engine? And then from the game engine, now you enable these metaverse experiences, multiplayer, networked, persistent, cross device. So so what does that mean? It means that you can kind of get out of just like a desktop application with 3D modeling and get it into the hands of more people so they can have these very natural, intrinsic experiences with these 3D models using something like an Xbox game controller if you want. So yeah, I think that's the promise. It sort of allows all these prior investments in 3D models to kind of just reach more people, be more engaging, and facilitate, better and better communication.
Absolutely. It's quite a phenomenal concept to comprehend. Bringing the whole industrial world into the digital scene kind of removes many challenges that we associate with the typical process. And speaking of which, in what ways can this help address common challenges which are now normally associated with construction, such as miscommunication, delays, or even rework?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just take a very simple example here, and it's um, it's the kind of thing so we're used to seeing things and say maybe a floor plan or a drawing, and you can kind of understand something about that. And maybe it's a clearance thing, maybe it's a visibility thing. Like, is a truck gonna be able to, like, make a tight corner, like can actually access the site? And that you can do that with drawings, no doubt. And you can even start to imagine that with a 3D model and sort of start to do the digital rehearsal ahead of time and iron things out. And then what's interesting now, when you take the next level and you just go straight into like a VR experience of this, you can instantly put someone like into the position, like the first person perspective of the actual worker. So the person may be driving the truck, accessing the site, navigating, communicating with the tower crane. Do you have like lines of sight? And these kind of things can be easy to kind of overlook in traditional media, such as 2D or even 3D models. There's something about being immersed at one-to-one scale that allows like the actual workforce to identify issues that they could just literally never see before, or it'd be too late in the site when you're physically experiencing the problem. Another value is, again, I'm going to kind of hit on this VR thing a bit, is that VR experience would allow a worker to have this full experience before going physically to the site. And so it sort of just builds up some muscle memory, some awareness, some like actually conscious awareness of like what that place is going to look like without having to actually go there. So I think that just reinforces someone's ability to kind of navigate a site, be aware of it before going into site and potentially getting into a hazardous safety situation. So I think that huge power in there, that one-to-one scale experience that you just don't get otherwise. And of course, talk about the metaverse. Absolutely, you can introduce more people in that scene, right? It's not just you. You can have other workers. You can have different people. You have different people, different scales interacting with you in that scene together.
Fantastic. So, could you provide us with some examples or case studies where this has been used to actually create tangible improvements within construction?
Yeah, so I'd say where it's being used today, I'm not sure it quite reaches to the level of a full metaverse because it's not yet multiplayer. But let's just take 4D construction simulation and visualization, which is the use case we're really trying to drive into the game engines right now. Already, contractors all over the world are using this medium, which is the introduction of the construction schedule, which is a 2D medium, just a Gantt chart of activities, and a BIM model. And when you combine those two things together, it produces, for simulation, computer animated graphics. And in that way, you're able to move backwards and forwards through time and interrogate how that construction site is going to unfold and basically highlight things that are not going to work. If you just take the schedule, there's all this hidden risk in it that becomes visible and tangible when you can see it with the 4D model. So that's on hand today, and that's an incredibly good use of 3D, 4D computer animation to solve like practical problems of like logistics planning, sequencing, over constrained space, and all that type of thing. It's just basic logistics layouts. And what we've been doing with early access, early adopter users is saying, hey, we can now take all those models and we're pulling them into Unreal Engine for the first time. And now the accounts, these clients can start to have game-like navigation with these models rather than just reviewing a video or an animation. And so we're seeing a lot of interest in that. So the users that are already kind of investing in 4D visual planning are like signing up to say take it to that next level and sort of move beyond just an animated video and deliver like real time interactions. So that's where I see that's the trend I see going from like producing videos as as a way of communicating to just making a connection to that 4D model in a game engine, sort of instantly.
Well, would you say that there are any specific projects that excite you the most?
Well, the story that I personally experienced is when we started prototyping the technology we built with an account in France, building this nuclear fusion reactor. And that was really cool. We had access to the models. We built a new technology, this new pipeline from Synchro into Unreal Engine. And then really we just started popping these models into our VR headsets. And so we were testing and running around that model in London. And then we were invited to the actual job site, got into our PPE gear and, went right into the site. And we really had that sense of like we'd been there and had, it's like really understood the scale and like how to kind of get around this reactor, which I thought was like really compelling to have that like firsthand experience of, wow, I've actually been here before, but it was completely virtual at that point.
Oh, that's so cool. The fact that you can actually experience a nuclear fusion reactor without having to physically be there.
It's like it's just to go through that whole process from the field office to like in the reactor, that was like at least, 45-minute walk and then change and then go through these different chambers and like be completely clean. It was like a very clean environment. It was like, yeah.
Crazy.
So that was,
Yeah,
and
that's
we've
so
got,
great.
I haven't had the direct experience, but we are working with some contractors here in the UK who are, they're working on this huge high-speed rail line, HS2, and so they're testing, they're using the technology themselves in-house as well to kind of get, virtually inside that project.
Oh, it's phenomenal. These digital twins are really curating a whole new level, not just for safety, but also practicality. Because back to your example of a nuclear fusion reactor, I mean, I know that the precautions are set in place to make them safe. However, being able to actually monitor them or control them and work with them from a remote perspective creates a whole new level of worker safety, which is one of the major problems in construction in the first place. So it's really interesting to see how this is being taken to the absolute extreme levels of building fusion reactors. I never thought this would be the case. But anyway, as you were saying, this supports the real time visualization and simulation of these construction projects. Would you say that this also aids in decision making?
Yeah, I think decision making, one, again, I come back to this idea of like the like Marshall McLuhan, for example, like the medium is the message was what he said. I don't know if you're familiar with Marshall McLuhan, but definitely check him out. Um, in this case, I think the medium is the message. Like it's this interactive, three-dimensional world that you can interact with in new ways, and then the content you load into that is not as important as the medium itself. And what does the medium enable? So, and you think about mediums, we're talking about, okay, radio, television, internet. Now we're talking metaverse. It means that we can be the entire construction team or a facility operator can be inside of a three-dimensional representation of reality with their peers and taking a look at the virtual version together as if you were physically there. So just like you'd maybe want to walk around and physically problem solve something, you can now do all that digitally, but now in a much more interactive, immersive way. So I think it's just it intrinsically empowers better decision making because it's mapping intrinsically to our understanding of the world, how we physically move through the world, how we physically solve problems with our hands, how we understand our physical space. And it's just simply lining up with that. It's like the digital's finally aligning with our understanding of reality.
Oh, absolutely. Well, as you said there as well, it creates room for training and trial and error. So it removes a certain level of uncertainty, which allows for workers to get a better grip on a certain project prior to undertaking it in the first place. So going back to what you mentioned before, with this not quite having reached that multiplayer level yet, I guess when it does reach that, that's when you're going to have more of a collaboration between different industries and people being able to work on it simultaneously. Do you see that being far off, or are we quite close to achieving that level of interdisciplinary collaboration?
I think we're getting much closer. Like I can tell you, we inside the iLab, we've run multiple prototypes where it absolutely works. We built an app. It's running our technology, running on a remote server, streaming, pixel streaming into a web browser, and we had like 4 or 5 people from all over the world flying around together with avatars inside that fusion reactor. And having audio visual pickup and hey, let's go over here, and like all of our avatars just like flew through the model and we're having discussion about it. And so like technically it's all there. Like these things exist. We have web browsers, we have networked interactivity, we have now built this pipeline with Unreal Engine. Now I think it's about kind of assembling all the pieces in the right way and just bring it to market. But then another cool thing about like Unreal Engine and our iTwin platform and other platforms that are out there in the market, like you don't even have to really wait for like us, Bentley Systems, to come up with the answer. You can just start assembling platform pieces at your own kind of pace and accelerate at your own kind of rate of innovation. I think that's what's so powerful about these platforms and engines, game engines, is like it's open. It's like if you're a game developer, you use Unity and Unreal Engine to make your game, right? There's not a prescribed like game that just emerges from these tools. It's whatever your imagination can conjure, and if market responds, you can go out there and and deliver your game. Or in this case, maybe you've got this amazing idea for how you want to improve construction on the site. All these tools exist that you can start tinkering with and assembling and pull together. Working with another company account where they're really trying to get this multiplayer thing up and running, and they had this really interesting idea of like, why not just like grab even like the webcam here, like off the Teams interface, and sort of pipe that into your avatar. So not just an avatar in the scene, but like what if you had like the video feed, kind of as an input. So you see the face, not just an avatar. I think there's a lot of these interesting things emerging, like how are we going to interact? How do we want to interact? What's it like to have a conversation inside a three-dimensional model, rather than just like heads on a screen on the side, or screen sharing. So I think it's coming, and I think honestly that the whole experience going through COVID and getting used to remote collaboration and Teams and Zoom culture, it's in some ways maybe prepared us for that. We just have to take it to that next level of immersion.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I reckon that the recent pandemic definitely caused that great shift into a more of a hybrid working environment. That's why we're more and more on these video calls nowadays. So, going back to what you were saying on how good the Unreal Engine is for creating these virtual environments, would you say that there's quite a high level of inseparability for how you can integrate with existing software tools and data sources commonly used in the construction industry?
Hmm. Yeah, I think this is the case for Unity and Unreal Engine both. And I'll just give another example. So you look at like every construction site has an existing context around it. It's just, we don't build things in a vacuum. So both of those engines, those platforms, you can pipe in just with the API connection, cesium terrain meshes, or now Google Maps. You can bring in the immersive Google Maps piece into Unity or Unreal Engine. So you've got this automatic kind of access to reality mesh, contextual information. And then what we've developed is then a way to like, okay, now make a connection to like the latest BIM model or the latest 4D model and geolocate that, drop it right into the context. So that's just one example. And another form of connectivity that you can render, which is with the API calls, is okay, you want to bring like a camera feed from a CCT camera. Okay, you can render that into the scene. Or if you want to make it connect to an asset with an IoT data feed, you can actually tap into that IoT feed, pull up data, and show like real-time information. So that's where you start to get into digital twin, right? Not just reality capture, but like reality capture through sensors. And now there's this new technology, I'm sure you've heard about it, NERF, neural radiance fields. You literally walk around with a phone, shoot a video, and a few minutes later, you've got this reconstructed AI-assisted 3D representation. And these can also be dropped into these game engines, Unity, Unreal Engine, Omniverse. So I think that's the name of the game. These platforms are intrinsically, they have to be open-ended, open open access, interoperable.
Well, this is very fascinating. So, considering that we're moving into a more digital age, obviously this creates a fair few more challenges per se, not necessarily with the development side, with privacy and security. What considerations would you say are needed to be put in place in order to address these concerns?
Yeah, so on the issue of privacy and security, all of our tech stack, it's running on it's all cloud, right? With sort of a cloud and edge platform, and we're running all that on Azure, so Microsoft Azure. So that's kind of the platform of choice, and that with that comes like all of the uptime and reliability of Microsoft as like a dominant cloud provider. So our security in many ways rests on the stability of Microsoft Azure today. So we're not, in other words, that's not what I'm saying is like we're not going out there and like recreating the wheel here when it comes to like data privacy and storage and access like that. And then we wrap two-factor authentication around everything. So it's like you would expect, right? You can't just like randomly log in to some 3D model and just download it. You have to log in, authenticate yourself. All that geometry, all that metadata is all running in secure servers.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, considering some of the projects that have been dealt with. Yeah, so the metaverse brings many possibilities. You can promote inclusivity and accessibility in a construction collaboration, particularly for remote teams or individuals with limitations. Is this something that is considered, or is it more of a fact to just help streamline the process?
No, I think it's a good point. This came up recently where it was like I think bridge inspection scenario engineer. So I think there's interesting opportunities to engage like even like the aging or retiring workforce too, or if you are disabled, you've got a lot of knowledge that you have um, that people can share. And then maybe if you can't physically go to a site and share that information, well, now like the metaverse would enable people to actually log in, be present, like observe things and like share their knowledge with other people as if you're actually going there. So I think it enables a whole level of communication that if you're not physically able to move or be there, this would enable. So I think there's huge potential there.
Lovely. Yes, there's always room for that within the metaverse. I would say it's silly not to utilize it, especially with people who do want to work but are no longer able to. So, to wrap up our conversation, Greg, can you point out some of the most exciting aspects that you are looking forward to for the future of the industrial metaverse? And any potential projects or collaborations that are in the works that you would like to share or tell with our audience?
Well, I'm looking forward to just see how things emerge. I think it's an emergent space. It's a new term in a way, the metaverse, but in fact, the technology has been under development for the last 20, 30 years. There's nothing actually that new about it. It's just been incrementally building up. And I do think that what we're seeing is the price point is coming down, the complexity needed to like engage with these 3D models is coming down. The platforms are becoming open, more accessible. There's just more people building 3D content. I think a lot of things are conspiring to enable this to happen. Who knows? Maybe Apple is going to release finally their headset, and like let's see what that does. Obviously, the iPhone made a huge, huge impact on how we think about of the phone and mobile computing. Without the touchscreen of the iPhone, we wouldn't be having the interactions we have today. So sometimes it takes like something to just, spark things, and everyone just starts looking at things completely differently. So yeah, I think there's a lot of pieces in play, and then we didn't really touch the subject of AI, but I definitely see that AI will have a place in the metaverse as well. It's going to be something you can talk to and chat with, and the AI itself will have its own sense of agency beyond just typing in a keyboard. So that also opens up really interesting interactions. Like, what's going to be our human computer interaction when we're constantly sort of in these models together with like a personal AI assistant, for example? What does that look like? How does that feel? um, what will our relationships be like, with AI augmented people? And if everyone has their own assistant kind of augmenting them, what happens then? Am I talking to Josh or Josh's avatar? His AI bot. It's like we'll have to figure that one out. But I would definitely watch that space. I think if metaverse was a bit of a hype term, and AI is a big term, but I don't see that thing going away anytime soon.
Absolutely not. I think it's going to be very concurrent with the metaverse for as long as it exists. Well, thank you very much, Greg. Really appreciate your time with us today. It's been a very good chat. Well, that's a wrap for our conversation with Greg Demchak, the Senior Director at Bentley Systems and Head of the Digital Innovation Lab. Be sure to stay tuned for weekly updates in the industry and content covering all things metaverse. Follow the Metaverse Insider on Twitter and LinkedIn and visit metaverse.tech for all our content. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.